Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma pleure sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
What you said on Fox about what the president said to you in his phone call about why he pardoned you, because I thought it was really interesting. He basically said he wanted you to be a bigger voice than ever, defending the principles that you believe in. And so I want to just go through, hear what those principles are. And I have some, I think, as reflected in your Twitter feed. So let's just go through this if this captures what your principles are. So February 2015, you tweeted about President Obama. And there are people here, racist overtones here. You can take the boy out of the ghetto, you say, watch this vulgar man show his stuff, while America cowers in embarrassment. You had another tweet in 2010 about President Obama's father. You say this philandering, inebriated African socialist is what you call him. Oh, sorry, that's from a Forbes magazine. So I'm confused. What are the principles that you are hoping to be able to talk about now and spread?
Well, Allison, first of all, I'd be happy to talk about those two tweets. Obama's father was a philandering, inebriated African socialist, as a matter of fact.
Just out of that, hold on. Are you anti-philandering?
Look, I'm not talking about this. I was referring to Obama's book, Dreams from My Father. Hold on. Let me talk about
on
principles.
The philandering, and I want to know if your principle, are you anti-philandering? Are you anti-vulgarity in your first one?
Philandering is not a principle. What I was saying is that Obama claims himself that he derived his dreams, his principles, from his father. And the Forbes magazine article listed what those principles were. It's not unreasonable to investigate that. Look, I'm a mainstream conservative. I worked in the Reagan administration. I've worked at the most reputable conservative think tanks, from AEI to the Hoover Institution. Yeah. The very idea that you can define me by a tweet or two over a long career is preposterous.
I'm not trying to define you, but I am trying to figure out what your principles are, and they seem confusing. Because you are obviously a supporter of President Trump's, and the idea that you would go after President Obama's father for philandering and for being vulgar, that strikes some as hypocritical. Why aren't you speaking out about President Trump's philandering? Why aren't you speaking out about his vulgarity?
Well, look, my argument about Obama wasn't about philandering. Obama is not a philanderer. His father was, but Obama wasn't.
Sure,
I was focusing on the anti-colonial ideology. The anti-colonial ideology of Barack Obama Sr., which was imbibed by the younger Obama. And my book really focuses on all that. It's not a sleazy attack on an individual. It's an examination of ideas.
Okay, but when you say to somebody, you can take the boy out of the ghetto, it is a sleazy attack on an individual.
Well, look, here's Obama in the White House, and he's got this selfie stick, and he's running around looking in the mirror and making ridiculous faces.
And that's what
if people say that Trump has degraded the... Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead. So you find that more degrading than things that you've heard in the past year in terms of vulgarity coming from the White House.
Look, In fairness, I have to say, we have seen a great degradation of the White House, and this didn't start with Trump. It didn't even start with Obama. It really goes back to Clinton, because I think there was a lowering of the tone in the 90s. And I'm sorry to see all this. I'm actually sorry to see the... No, I wouldn't say. In some ways he hasn't, but I think he is also a product of an environment that's very destructive. Look, this personal attack
he's setting the tone.
That Trump... no, because I think that Republicans have said, basically, in the past we nominated Boy Scouts like Romney, people who are squeaky clean, and the left launched such attacks on these people that they ended up looking like Lucifer. We're finally going to appoint a tough guy who can take it and can return a punch. And so Trump, yes, I think he's in a much more in the mud, if you might say. And I regret that this is the environment we now live in, but we do.
There's one more tweet that I want to bring up with you, and it's about the Parkland students, and where you said after they went through the massacre, and then they were trying to fight gun violence, and they won some and they lost some, and you said worst news since their parents told them to get summer jobs. You apologized for that, and I'm sure that those kids appreciated that apology, but it was so shocking, frankly, the first one, that you would go after these kids who had just lived through a killing field. What principle is that you were trying to communicate there going after them?
I got to tell you honestly that was a case where I was trying to make a point that completely misfired, and I take the full responsibility. As I saw it, and this is how you get into the heat of the battle in social media, that those kids were becoming pawns in a kind of political campaign. They were being manipulated by other people. They were being, for example, dragged down to the legislature where a vote was taking place.
Well, but
and
they
so my
marched there on
target
their
was
own.
really the media
they marched
manipulation.
there on their own. They weren't dragged there. These kids were really motivated and marched there on your own. I hear what you're saying. That's how you saw it, but facts just don't support that.
Well, what I'm saying is that, in general, teenagers do not have the sophistication to be able to track legislative votes and show up in the right place at the right time and pose for the media as if they are stars on a TV show.
I've heard this argument before, but teenagers protest all the time. Teenagers are passionate. This is what happened in the 60s. We've had this argument before. You didn't believe that I get it. You didn't think that they were acting of their own accord, but they did. But still, I appreciate you saying that tweet was a misfire, but in terms of principles and of elevating the conversation and of changing what you say about the degradation of everything we're talking about, that principle is just so reprehensible to go after them.
It is reprehensible to go after them, and I'm very sorry I did, and as you know, I apologize for it.
It is Wednesday, the 6th of June of 2018, a day that will live in infamy. You are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. And our daily special is Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. It all ties together, folks. It all ties together. Well. Dinesh D'Souza is one of these slimy... I know it's early, but he's a slimy bastard. There's no other way to put it. And I always hated these particular kind of slime balls. Now, growing up with a father who was a university professor, you see a little bit of what academe is like. And I always... And I have to admit, maybe my Holden Caulfield, the adult as hypocrite radar was always highly tuned. But I was particularly offended by the types that Dinesh D'Souza is emblematic of, who would hide behind the veil of academe to lend credence to their, I don't know, view, because they have some idea that maybe if I quantify this, it'll lead credibility to it. It'll just lead to credibility, and I don't know. I was highly offended by those types, and they were so transparent too, especially when you get a martini or two in them. Oh boy, they'll loosen their ties. Boy, there's so much going on in the world again. I mean, you get up and you think, I think I've got this news read figured out today. Primaries, very important primaries. Super Tuesday, they called it. And interesting that there were about 118,000 voters whose names mysteriously disappeared off of LA County voting rolls. I was wondering if the code was in Cyrillic. Huh? Yeah, mysterious, isn't it? Kellyanne Conway on this morning saying it can't be Russian help because if you can find one vote that was, the tabulation was changed. But if you prevent people from voting, that's almost like changing a vote. When you consider that less than 70,000 people in 3 states, or small counties spread across 3 states, decided the direction of the free world. And 118,000 missing in LA County alone. Yep. I don't know, just makes you wonder. Oh, the judge in the Brock Turner case, the Stanford student who had his rape conviction downgraded to, some ungodly, time served, which was a week. I kid. But, this Brock Turner kid had his prison time drastically reduced. Well, that judge got his position. He lost his position. The first judge since the 30s to be recalled in last night's election. So there's that. I think people are mad. And, and of course, in the Missouri special election, the Democrat won in a district where Trump took it big time. And no Democrat has held office there since, since way before they put In God We Trust in the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay. Or Under God. Excuse me. Oh, which reminds me, Donald Trump forgot the words to God Bless America. And everybody says he appeared to have, stumbled. He didn't appear. He doesn't even know the words. You can't forget the words if you don't know them to begin with. He doesn't know the national anthem. He doesn't know God Bless America. I'm sure that they don't teach This Land Is Your Land in, that American Civics crash course that the FSB teaches out of the Kremlin. He did have to have a crash course. He could care less. Oh, I go on and on and on. I have to stop. All right. What are we attending to today? I'm afraid to see how long I've talked. Oh my God. Okay. Well, on the rest of the menu, the Trump administration gives up on filling the next in line position under Rosenstein because no one will take the job. The top energy regulator points to problematic wartime language in Trump's coal bailout plan. Who is writing this stuff? Bannon? No. Could it be John Bolton? The mind reels. And, speaking of which, we are shocked that Facebook allowed a Chinese firm that is deemed a national security threat to access its user personal data. You and me, Chinese firm, they know us. They know your likes. They got your kitty pictures and more. A lot more. After the break, of course, then we move to the chef's table where Ted Cruz picks a fight with a conservative reporter and loses. And as Saudi women get the right to drive a car. They finally get to drive a car. The activists who fought for that right remain jailed. Why? For national security reasons, of course. Where else do you think they learned it? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you'll notice to the rightish of the page the chat room link. Kelly Lincoln, our roaring girl, does monitor that in real time or during and throughout the day. So do contact us there and engage with others. They are there too. And they might even be able to answer your question before Kelly gets to, but if she's there, she will. To the rightish of the chat room link are the contribute donate buttons, and thank you for your generosity. We are unable to do this without you, and it really helps the radio station resist where it needs to resist, because we are Resistance Radio. My gosh, and thank you for that, truly. And you can follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform. Thank you, Tom. And I guess I'm supposed to be responsible for Facebook. If you want to go there, go there. There's stuff there. And you can follow me. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. And you can follow the show at Cookbook West. West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I think if you put that in, it'll at least get you to the right spot. But Cookbook West, at Cookbook West. What did I do? I didn't do it. They generated it for me. I missed something. Oops. And you can also get podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIns, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Alrighty. Well, we better get on this. The day is just flying. Oh, my. The first article here is by the great T-Bog out of Raw Story. And Rosenstein. I said Rosenstein. I meant Rosenstein. Okay, according to a report in the Wall Street Journal, not the editorial page, okay, just to be clear, the Trump administration has abandoned a search for a candidate to fill the number 3 position at the Justice Department. I think they mean the Department of Justice. And the reason they're unable to, and the reason they've abandoned the search, no one will take the job. According to the report, whoever occupies the number 3 position at the department behind Attorney General Jeff Sessions and Assistant Attorney General Rod Rosenstein would potentially be in the line of fire should Donald Trump fire Rosenstein, who is currently overseeing Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation into the 2016 election, if you haven't figured that one out by now. I figure that people who only listen to Fox News wouldn't be listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I figure. I mean, maybe there might be a stray one or two. But for the most part, I think everybody knows what's been going on with Rosenstein. Now, the report notes the delay in filling the post is the latest sign of the difficulties besetting the agency. Feature, not a bug, which lacks permanent politically appointed leaders to oversee at least 5 high-profile units, including the criminal, civil, and tax division. I don't know. If you were a mobster and you had a chance to take over America, what would you do? I don't know. What did I say before? The mind reels. According to the sources, a concern of many candidates would be having to sit for hearings and a confirmation process likely dominated by questions about the Russia probe. After that, no one wants to be Bork. No way. Speaking with the Journal, sources inside the White House singled out 2 potential candidates, attorneys Helgi Walker and Kate Todd, who both passed on the position, saying they have no interest in the job. At the current moment, I would think not. guest offering here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Smothered Benedict Wednesdays is by Mark Hand out of Think Progress. There is no doubt emergency conditions exist that could easily be used to justify greater government intervention in the U.S. electric power industry. The planet is warming at a rapid pace, and the government could take more urgent steps to prevent the conditions from growing even more dire. But when Donald Trump ordered Energy Secretary Rick Perry on Friday to take immediate steps to address an emergency, he was not referring to climate change or public health. Donald Trump had another emergency in mind, one that is greatly harming the bottom lines of his fossil fuel benefactors. Trump's order, which directed the Department of Energy to find ways to force Americans to buy power from failing coal and nuclear power plants, is another plot twist in a year-long narrative fabricated by the White House about a national security crisis on the horizon. Now, most industry officials still don't believe the closing of older coal and nuclear power plants is creating conditions for a national emergency. The nation's top energy regulator also is concerned by the Trump administration's use of wartime language in its bid to bail out these two sectors. Now, let me jump in here because I don't know how Mark Hand is sticking to the story at hand. No pun intended. But let's interject a little bit of history here as well. Okay? This is exactly what Putin did when he changed the power grid and started handing out concessions to his cronies. It was a national emergency, national security risks on the horizon, almost down to the word horizon. So, the Heritage Foundation, however, oil companies to renewables, environmental groups, and the Heritage Foundation wide-scale opposition to Trump's proposed bailout of coal and nuclear isn't standing in the way of the administration moving forward with its unprecedented plan. Because, he's there to shake things up. He's not there to do things the normal way, because crooks don't do it the normal way. Well, normal to them is, you know what I mean. It's all how they look at it. He really believed it was normal. Oh, you think it's normal to just wrest control of whole departments this way? I mean, without the whole regulatory process? Well, yeah, he's a crook. He really believes that. All right. Well, no matter how you're looking at it, the portrayal of the current circumstances of these plants as an emergency is one that is wrong, and that regulator that we referenced, his name is Smazenak. There's nothing about these plants that particularly needed in order to ensure the reliable functioning of the bulk power system. There are plenty of other plants that are capable and other resources that are capable of serving the energy needs of the bulk power system. Let's see. The Defense Production Act is meant to be used when there's a scarcity of materials needed for national defense. The idea that electric power supply is a scarce commodity is pretty absurd, given high reserve margins in the PJM interconnection in other regions of the country. So it operates a grid for 65 million people in 13 states from Illinois to Virginia, said that Monday that Trump's order complicates the functioning of competitive power markets that produce low costs for consumers. Well, of course, if you jack the price up, then you have nowhere to go. Craig Glazer, Vice President of Federal Government Policy at the group, said Trump's call to save coal and nuclear power plants worsens the headache of recent federal and state efforts to subsidize energy sources. The actions of Trump and Energy Secretary Perry complicates this issue even more. Well, that's a feature, not a bug. They're there to disrupt not to keep things running. Here in the Bistro Cafe at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is an article out of Alternet by Cody Fenwick. Now, I'm shocked that Facebook would have allowed a Chinese company that is under the auspices of being a national security threat. If they pay, it's okay. So, of course, Mr. Fenwick here says the social media company has a terrible record on protecting users' privacy. Yeah, because you are the product. All of your privacy is. Facebook's scandalous handling of private user data somehow keeps getting worse. The New York Times yesterday revealed that the social media company allowed several Chinese device manufacturers to access the personal data of users and users' friends without their knowledge, including one firm, the telecommunications company Huawei, which has close ties to the ruling party in China and has been deemed a national security threat by the United States. Well, Facebook is bigger than any country. Come on. The data sharing agreement Facebook had with Huawei, as well as at least 3 other Chinese companies, is similar to that which it had with Amazon, Apple, BlackBerry, and Samsung. On Sunday, the Times revealed those data-sharing relationships, which Facebook defended by saying implausibly that it considered those companies extensions of Facebook. What? The partnerships allowed the devices to access information from users and all of their friends, including work and education history, relationship status, and likes. In a statement to the newspaper, Facebook insisted that the information given to Huawei stayed on the devices that people use to access Facebook, and that this information was not sent back to the company. However, it's not obvious Facebook could be certain about this, and the fact that these relationships remained undisclosed for so long raises questions about the company's trustworthiness. You mean it's taken you that long to question it? Come on. I look forward to learning more about how Facebook ensured that information about their users was not sent to Chinese servers, said Senator Mark Warner. Hearings. Will Zuckerberg show up? He better. All right. Speaking of showing up, we're right at break time, and we better get to our break. So we will. And then we'll come back, of course, and report on weather from around the world, and then finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Getting a vaccine can be a painful experience, especially when you're a kid. But getting told the shot might hurt a bit could actually make it worse.
We know that expectation affects pain experience in adults, but we don't really know whether this is also true for children.
Kalina Michalska, a developmental neuroscientist at the University of California, Riverside. She led a study to find out. The study included 25 adults and 48 children, and 27 of the kids had a pre-existing anxiety disorder. because medical procedures make pretty much all kids anxious, but those who are anxious to start with tend to find the experience even more painful. The researchers used a handheld wand to apply heat to the forearm of each participant, and they asked subjects to rate the temperature in terms of discomfort. The hottest setting was about the temperature of very warm tap water. Uncomfortable, perhaps, but not damaging.
But during the experiment, we were most interested in only one temperature, the one that each subject rated as medium.
And that's where the anticipation part of the experiment comes in. Subjects were played one of two tones.
One tone meant that low heat was coming, the other meant that high heat was upcoming.
But here's the sneaky part. No matter what tone was played, participants got the same heat applied, the one rated as medium.
So even though the subject heard a cue indicating high pain or low pain, the pain was only medium.
Or at least that's how it should have felt. But what happened was that subjects reported feeling what they thought they would.
If we tell them, through this tone, that they're going to experience a lot of pain, they'll actually experience more pain. They rated the pain as higher. And conversely, if we tell them that they will experience only low pain, they also rate their experiences as less painful. And this is really important because it kind of reinforces the necessity of not hyping up painful experiences and also of discouraging children from ramping up the experience in their head.
And the same, it seems, goes for the grown-ups.
One aspect surprised us, which is that all three groups experienced a similar relationship between pain expectation and pain experience. We expected the strongest correlation among anxious children, but however, all three groups showed a very large effect of expectancy on their experience of pain.
The research is in the journal Psychosomatic Medicine. Next up, Michalka says she'd like to examine whether negative associations can be unlearned. So, next time you need a shot, remember, if you think it won't be so bad, maybe it won't be. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Pools, water parks, and other recreational water venues are popular places to relax and stay cool, but they can be sources of serious illness. Since 2000, nearly 500 outbreaks have been reported at recreational water venues in the U.S., resulting in over 27,000 illnesses and 8 deaths. Most were caused by parasites, bacteria, viruses, or certain chemicals in the water. Parents with young children who have diarrhea should not allow their children to swim or play in the water. In addition, bathers should check the inspection scores of pools and water parks and can conduct mini inspections using test strips before getting in the water. A few simple precautions can allow you to share the fun, not the germs. Thank you for joining us on A Minute of Health with CDC.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Welcome to 60-Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. A social culture of reform in pre-Civil War America was the fertile soil in which a variety of movements against slavery grew. These movements would later lead to the passage of the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. Among the most important abolition societies was the American Anti-Slavery Society, founded in Philadelphia in 1833 by William Lloyd Garrison and Arthur Tappan. The society espoused the immediate, uncompensated abolition of slavery. Garrison championed Frederick Douglass, the brilliant abolitionist and former slave who became the foremost African-American voice opposing slavery. Abolition societies attracted many women activists, although men sometimes opposed women's participation, causing abolitionist organizations to split apart. Even though traditionalist men sometimes opposed women's activism, women succeeded in playing significant roles in organizations opposing slavery. That's all for today's podcast, 60-Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute. 60-Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that Minneapolis Teachers Union Local 59 went out on strike. They took the vote to strike despite the fact that state law prohibited teachers from striking. But after months of negotiations that went nowhere, the teachers decided it was time to act. The main issue for the strike was wages. One teacher, George Kimball, recalled why he had supported the strike, stating, "The wages were so low. I had 5 children at the time, and we could barely survive. We couldn't take it anymore." The strike lasted 14 days. The teachers did not win the gains they hoped for with their work action, but their strike drew public attention to the lack of bargaining rights for public sector workers. The next year, Minnesota Governor Wendell Anderson signed into law the Public Employees Labor Relations Act. This act granted public sector workers the right to collective bargaining. The Minneapolis teachers' strike played a key role in Minnesota's public sector workers gaining the fundamental right of union representation. The 1960s and 70s saw a wave of teacher strikes across the nation as educators stood up for themselves as workers. Across the country, there were more than 1,000 teacher strikes between 1960 and 1974. More than 750,000 teachers walked out of the classroom and onto the picket lines. By the end of the 1970s, more than 70% of public school teachers were covered by collective bargaining agreements. For teachers concerned about class size, pensions, wages, school safety, and the quality of education, the strike remains an important way to build solidarity and to show the power of our nation's educators.
Hold your ground! Hold your ground! Sons of Gondor! Of Rohan! My brothers! I see in your eyes the same fear that would take the heart of me. A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wolves and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand, men of the West!
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour report recorded on June 6, 2018. I'm Mark Boulanger. The annual conference of the UN's International Labour Organization in Geneva continues with hundreds of unionists amongst the 4,000 delegates. The ILO is the United Nations agency specialized on matters of work in the world. It develops international laws called conventions on topics such as slavery and pay equity. One of the unionists attending the conference is Sue Longley, the General Secretary of the global union IUF. The IUF represents workers employed in a wide range of sectors, including food processing, hotels, restaurants, and agriculture. Ms. Longley used her address to the delegates to call for the elimination of sexual harassment.
My organization, the IUF, represents many millions of women workers. According to the ILO, women now make up over 40% of the hired labour force in agriculture and almost 70% of the tourism workforce. Most of them are in jobs regarded as low-skilled. They are underpaid and undervalued. Many are in precarious work. Outsourcing and contracting out of work are widespread in our sectors, and agriculture and tourism have many seasonal and temporary workers. Migrant workers make up a significant part of the workforce in both sectors. So what are the consequences of these non-standard forms of employment? Well, there are many, but the one I want to address today is sexual harassment. Women in agriculture, hotels, tourism, and also in food processing have to give sexual favours to managers and supervisors to make sure they get work. We know that sexual harassment is a regular daily occurrence for women workers in agriculture, hotels and restaurants. Surveys around the world have indicated that a large majority of hospitality workers, up to 89% in some countries, have experienced sexual harassment on the job in the course of their working lives. For this reason, we are calling on companies, on employers, to work with us to ensure an end to this scourge of sexual harassment. Last week, here in Geneva, with affiliates from hotel workers around the world, we launched a global set of demands calling on the world's largest hotel company to work with unions to end this endemic sexual harassment which plagues the industry. We have very concrete demands. We want prevention measures, quicker response times to reports of sexual harassment. We want protection from workers who report sexual harassment from guests, managers or co-workers. We have a list of demands, very clear, a very precise programme of action. We then held a meeting here in the ILO to discuss gender inequality in the tourism sector. At that meeting, hotel workers told us of their personal experiences of sexual harassment and assault by guests. And I tell you, it was very hard to listen to their stories, to see them in tears, recounting how their lives had been affected by this trauma, how management blamed the victim and failed to take adequate measures to protect workers. But what bravery and conviction. I was proud to be with them, proud to offer the support we could. But I don't want you to think that women are passive victims of gender discrimination. In my experience, women are organising and fighting back in many places. Our affiliates have impressive campaigns at national level. In the Nordic countries, we are not on the menu. In the USA and Canada, hands off, pants on. Both get the message to customers that sexual harassment is not tolerated. We need strong policy statements that sexual harassment will not be tolerated, and there needs also to be urgent action to reduce women's vulnerability by improving their position in the workforce and challenging gender stereotypes.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. You can find more labor news on our website at www.radiolabor.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Labor. I'm Mark Belanger. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
From UN headquarters in New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 minutes. The United Nations Human Rights Office is condemning the United States for separating migrant children from their families at the southern border with Mexico, a practice embraced by the Trump administration as a part of a new zero-tolerance policy that began in May. According to some estimates, more than 11,000 children are currently being held in U.S. detention facilities separate from their parents.
In the U.S., migration control appears to have been prioritized ahead of the effective care and protection of children.
Ravina Shamdasani is a UN spokesperson in Geneva, Switzerland.
Children should never be detained for reasons related to their own or their parents' immigration status. Detention is never in the best interest of the child and always constitutes a child rights violation.
The U.S. is the only country to not have ratified the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, but is still bound by many of its provisions, which are contained in other human rights treaties. On Tuesday, President Trump erroneously claimed that separating families at the border is the fault of bad legislation passed by Democrats. Early last month, Attorney General Jeff Sessions defended the shift to harsher immigration policies that could lead children to be separated from their parents.
If you are smuggling a child, then we will prosecute you, and that child may be separated from you as required by law.
And search and rescue attempts continue in Guatemala 2 days after the country's Fuego volcano erupted, sending waves of volcanic material known as pyroclastic flows through the countryside, killing at least 69 people. Experts say those pyroclastic flows are often the most deadly part of volcanic eruptions because they look like clouds of dust and ash but can exceed 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, travel at hundreds of miles per hour, and spark fires. Luke Vargas, the United Nations. you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Okay, so let's begin with weather from around the world, and we always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it's currently, 55 degrees, and we will be getting a little warmer than we were yesterday. Looks like we will be going to around 85, maybe a tad warmer. We'll have a low tonight of about 55 to 57 degrees. Well, that's rather pleasant, actually. Winds currently are out of the southwest, about 3 miles per hour. Will be increasing to 5 to 10 miles per hour as they shift out of the west-northwest, and they will continue out of the west-northwest tonight at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Scour the sky, please. And what else? A small chance of precipitation beginning tonight and increasing, and then Saturday should have some rain here, though I will be in Salem on Saturday. I will be driving shortly after I finish up production work here at the mothership for, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy on Friday. I'll be driving north to the state capital, and my grandson is graduating from high school. Yes, it happens so quick. So let's see, grass pollen continues to be very high. Air quality index is good at 12, so it's a tad lower than yesterday. The UV index remains very high at 9, and so take care if you have those numbers, of course. High pressure dominates at 29.86 inches. It's holding steady. Visibility is at 10 miles. And relative humidity is at 67%. Well, dry conditions are continuing as it gets even drier. Okay, weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. London is 71 and sunny. Paris is 74, mostly cloudy. They continue to have their thunderstorm, high winds, and rain advisory that could knock out critical infrastructure like electricity. Rome is 80 degrees and sunny, and they are having a heat advisory because apparently 80 degrees is enough to knock off their infrastructure. Kiev is 66 and fair. Kabul is 84 and fair. Hong Kong is 77 with rain. Tokyo is 67 degrees with a rain shower. Sydney, Australia is 55 degrees and fair. San Francisco, California is 51, mostly cloudy. And they continue to have small craft advisory for high winds, gale force winds on the bay and offshore. And New York is 64 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Christopher at Share Blue Media penned this first offering here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. Well, Cruz humiliated himself for the second day straight trying to defend his laughable response to Trump's claim about pardon powers. Texas Republican Senator Ted Cruz lashed out at a reporter who helped Cruz embarrass himself and was promptly smacked down for all to see. On Monday, Weekly Standard reporter Haley Bird asked Cruz in the halls of Congress if he agreed with Trump that a president can pardon himself. After an awkward silence of 18 seconds, Cruz finally replied, "That is not a constitutional issue I have studied, so I will withhold judgment at this point. Cruz's embarrassment was deepened when Byrd released audio of the exchange. But Cruz responded hours later by whining on Twitter that some, quote, dishonest journalists have attacked me for taking 18 seconds to answer without acknowledging that I was walking through the Capitol late to a meeting and simply ignoring a question that a reporter had called out at me. Cruz continued to make excuses, adding, when reporters chased me down the hall and another asked the question again, I chose to answer. Byrd, who is a congressional reporter with Republican-friendly Weekly Standard, responded yesterday morning by noting three things. One, she said, obviously the audio speaks for itself. Two, she continued, every reporter who was in that scrum, people who have interacted with Cruz for years, came away from it knowing it was an abnormal response from him. And three, our story is accurate, she concluded. Cruz was also called out by the New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman, hi Maggie, who pointed out that Cruz's delayed response was a lie. The real issue that he claimed he hadn't studied Pardon Power, which he wrote about decades ago. I've never studied it, but I'll write about it. In fact, Cruz wrote about the Pardon Power as recently as 2015 while attacking President Obama over his use of executive authority, and Cruz also proved himself a liar by making detailed arguments about the pardon powers in his midnight Twitter rant. For someone who has argued in front of the Supreme Court, Cruz makes a startlingly regular habit of getting schooled on constitutional law. Just over a year ago, Cruz tried to pick a fight with former acting Attorney General Sally Yates over the constitutionality of Trump's Muslim ban and slinked away after she bested him. Maybe Cruz should give up on constitutional law and try to find something he's good at.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Dee Parvaz from Think Progress has penned this last offering here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Chef's Table. The Gulf Arab Kingdom is anxious to promote its progressive image, even as it accuses women's rights activists of endangering national security. As the first women finally get the right to drive in Saudi Arabia this week, the only country in the world that continued to ban women from driving, several activists behind the campaign to fight for that right remain behind bars. Among the women being held since mid-May are Lujian al-Hothal, Aziza al-Yosef, and Iman al-Nafjan Hathlul. Lujian al-Hathlul is the first woman who I mentioned, and I apologize for terribly mispronouncing these names. The AP reports that according to the country's chief prosecutor, 17 people have been arrested in recent weeks, with 8 of them being temporarily released. It's unclear what the terms of that release are, but those arrested are being held under suspicion of threatening national security. I like that. Rathna Begum, Human Rights Watch's women's rights researcher for the Middle East and North Africa region, told Think Progress that she was shocked at the timing of the arrests, but not at the fact that the activists were targeted in the first place. In a way, while this was still shocking, it wasn't that much of a surprise, she said, because we know that it was linked to the driving ban being lifted, because the same detained women and others were called on the day that they announced that they were going to lift the driving ban and had been told not to speak to the media. The women were told not to even say anything positive, and their arrest, said Begum, was clearly designed to prevent any government criticism and to make it clear that they can't ask for further reforms. Well, we got the right to drive. Gosh, maybe they could get some other rights. As human beings, can't have that. While the Saudi government has used similar tactics in the past, the director at Amnesty International calls this media campaign an escalation. Okay, the level of exaggerated charges is very worrisome, as is the fact that they have these so-called confessions without access to their attorneys. Oh, how nice. Yeah. Okay, they confess to wanting women to have rights. That's a very big national security threat, obviously, because men still run the lives of Saudi women. Women will officially be allowed to drive in the country on June 24th, although they still live under strict guardianship that sees virtually every aspect of their lives, including legal agency controlled by men. Oh, you want a bank account? I don't know. The guardianship laws were also being protested by some of those women who remain jailed, so obviously first driving and then legal agency, that is the biggest national security threat that a country could have that is predominantly run by men. Okay, the State Department told Think Progress that it was following up with the Saudi government. We have made our views on these announced detentions clear, said a department spokesperson, answering questions via email, adding that the detention of the activists is cause for concern and that the U.S. supports space for civil society and free speech. We urge the government of Saudi Arabia to ensure due process, transparency, and rule of law for all citizens and residents, the spokesperson said. Well, at least we got some sort of statement. That brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll be back here tomorrow for Metro Shrimp and Grits Thursdays. Breaking news as it breaks throughout the day, so stay tuned to Netroots Radio, and we will visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.